Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. On the 20th day of October 2021, I'm Dave Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first on the hazardous weather graphics, we've got a high wind watch out for the Fox Islands for Thursday night through Friday, and that's for strong winds. And obviously for a high wind watch, it's out for strong winds. And so for the area, Nikolsky to Unalaska, AKwx Island, those areas, Dutch Harbor, and there may be one actually come out for the Alaska Peninsula as well, possibly. We'll have to wait and see. Right now, it's just for the eastern Aleutians. And again, that's for wind gusting at that time period, tomorrow night and Friday, up to 85 miles an hour. Otherwise, that's a storm we're watching out there to the west, that big mass of clouds shifting into the southern and south central Bering Sea, right over the AKwx area, with the low center still back southwest to Shemya. And winds are coming down from what they were over the Alaska Peninsula and Pribilofs today. They're pretty gusty, but diminishing there in that northwest flow and the cold air feed coming out of the Russian Far East. You see the broken open cell queue across from the area from just north of St. Matthew Island down toward the Pribilofs into the Alaska Peninsula. That's all starting to weaken and shift eastward. And another low center tracking northeastward there off the southeast coast, tracking northwestward off the southeast coast, bringing some pretty gusty winds early on over the Alaska Peninsula, or over the southeast coast, and into the south central Alaska area, some light rain. Winds gusted 62 miles an hour at Cape Decision. And rolling that through again, you can see that low center tracking right up to just south of Cape St. Elias, or actually just southeast of Middleton Island. Winds aren't all that strong, but some rain getting into Prince William Sound, about 1/10 of an inch falling at Valdez. And Willow had about 1/10 of an inch as well. Otherwise, lighter amounts, 1/10 of an inch of rain and snow fell at Nome today with that weak low over the Bering Strait, and some light showers scattered across the southwest interior, as well as the western Brooks Range, and rain in over the Panhandle, light rain, 1/10 of an inch at Juneau and about 1/3 of an inch at Latoya Bay. On the chart, there's that front still off the coast, much weaker than it was, and that low center tracking northwestward into the Gulf, weakening as well, and consequently, winds aren't expected to increase too much from the North Gulf Coast, but rain will continue and actually get a little more widespread tonight into south central Alaska, cloudy, mild, and occasionally wet, with snowfall levels generally above 1,500 feet. And best chance of rain, northern Panhandle. And gale and storm force winds in advance of that front pushing in toward the Pribilofs and into the Fox Islands tonight. And gale and storm force winds on the backside of that low over the western Bering, possibly even hurricane force winds toward morning there. Lingering snow showers, Seward Peninsula and the northwest coast, lingering rain and snow showers along the southwest coast, dry over the central northern interior. And for tomorrow, 945 millibar low tracks to near just south of the Pribilof Islands. Another wave on the front just south of the Alaska Peninsula. Hurricane force wind warnings around that low center, especially on the back side there. Looking at 70 knot sustained winds out of the north and northwest. And gale storm force winds ahead of the front. Wind and rain increase markedly along the southwest coast during the afternoon tomorrow. But the interior, pretty fair, with just isolated showers of rain or snow in the north, or just rain mostly over the southern Kenai Peninsula, southern Cook Inlet area, and the North Gulf Coast. Chance of rain, increasing wind, southern Panhandle, but the heaviest rain and wind will stay south of Dixon Entrance. But back to that pattern, low centers tracking northwestward off the southeast coast on Friday, so look for an increase in the winds and rain, especially along the coast of the Panhandle, and gales with increasing rain again for the North Gulf Coast, and then high wind watch out for the Fox Islands. Again, possible wind gust 85 miles an hour from Nikolsky over to King Cove, False Pass, those areas. And then for lows tonight in the 40s for the southeast coast, upper 20s to lower 30s, south central Alaska, staying above freezing most areas, from Anchorage down to the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island. In the 20s west of the Alaska Range and the Kuskokwim Valley, and upper 20s for the Copper River Basin, upper 20s for Bristol Bay. Highs tomorrow, mid-40s Kodiak Island, and 45 for Homer and Seward, as well as about 44 for Valdez. Lower 50s over the Panhandle, near 40 elsewhere, except west of the mountains, looking at 30s. Lows in the 20s, western Alaska or the Kuskokwim Valley, Susitna Valley, Copper River Basin, lower 20s, 30 to 35. South central Alaska near 40 Kodiak Island in the 40s under mild southerly flow for the Panhandle, and highs 50 to 55 for the southeast coast, warmest in the south around Prince of Wales Island, mid-40s Kodiak Island, otherwise mid-30s for the Copper River Basin and the Kuskokwim Valley. Highs teens and 20s north of the Brooks Range in the 20s, south of the mountains near 30 around Nome, followed by lows in the highs in the 30 to 35 degree range, central interior in the 20s, Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, and followed by lows once again in the teens, call it 5 to 15 north slope, Brooks Range to near 20 around the central Arctic coast. South of the Brooks Range, 20 to 25 for the lows, except up for 20s for the Seward Peninsula, lower 30s, St. Lawrence Island. Friday afternoon highs up that way. Fairbanks, high 35, otherwise lower to mid-30s through the central interior to mostly in the 20s from the Brooks Range on out to the Arctic coast, and mid-30s, Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, and St. Lawrence Island. Lows, upper 20s, lower 30s for the southwest coast, the Bering Sea and the Aleutians in the 30s to near 40 for Adak and Atka. Areas of the Alaska Peninsula, highs tomorrow near 50. Upper 40s central Aleutians, mid-40s for the Pribilofs. Lows mid-30s for St. Paul and St. George, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Milder, though, for Sandpoint and Chignik. Mid-30s Adak and Atka. And about shade under the frost point there for St. Lawrence Island. Near freezing along the southwest coast. Upper 30s for the southwest coast on Friday afternoon. Otherwise 40 to 45 for the central Aleutians. 40s, mid to upper 40s for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic for Thursday morning, you can see a band of IFR along the west coast, in across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta to the western Alaska Range, Iliamna Lake. Marginal VFR, Bristol Bay, Kuskokwim Delta. More IFR in the Pribilofs with that big storm out in the Bering Sea, covering central eastern Aleutians to the Alaska Peninsula to Nelson Lagoon. Then a band of VFR farther northeast there into Kodiak Island and back into the IFR along the and south of the Alaska Range, western Copper River Basin, northern Cook Inlet, Kinnick Arm, Manuska Valley, Turnagain Arm, Prince William Sound, all the North Gulf Coast, coastal areas of the Panhandle, including areas to the north. And for the afternoon on Thursday afternoon, improving, becoming VFR in northern Panhandle, staying IFR down south. IFR, Prince William Sound and North Gulf Coast, IFR, western Susitna Valley, mostly along the eastern and southern slopes of the central and western Alaska Range. IFR, southeast Bering Sea, northern Bering, except up to around St. Lawrence Island, marginal VFR there. IFR for the Pribilofs, Alaska Peninsula, but really improving out west from Nikolsky all the way out to the Komodorskis, VFR. And IFR, central eastern Arctic coast, a lot of marginal VFR, North Slope, Brooks Range, Koyukuk, Kobuk, Selawik Valleys, northwest coast. VFR for the Yukon Flats, much of the eastern interior, Copper River Basin. And for the morning Friday, eastern interior VFR, areas of VFR over the west side, and kind of a band of IFR and marginal conditions through the central interior from Cook Inlet, western Alaska Range, up to the central eastern North Slope Arctic coastal areas. Big batch of IFR there for the eastern Bering Sea, St. Lawrence Island, right down to the Alaska Peninsula, but Adak, Atka on westward, nothing but VFR. IFR, Kodiak Island, marginal for Fognak Island, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and a lot of IFR there covering the most of the Panhandle. Lincoln Isle Glacier Bay, though, marginal. And for the afternoon, solid IFR for the southeast coast up to just west of Cape St. Elias, or east of Cape St. Elias, covering Yakutat, patch of IFR, both western Prince William Sound, maybe up to the Talkeetnas, and along the Aleutian Range, Bering Sea side, Alaska Peninsula, central eastern Arctic coast. And for passes, Anatuvik, marginal VFR, same forecast for Radigan, occasionally marginal tomorrow, Lake Clark and Merrill, occasional marginal VFR throughout the day, either approach, but rainy, looks IFR for the most part at times on Thursday. Windy, IFR southern entrance, otherwise VFR, otherwise marginal VFR, possible VFR out the northern entrance into the valley, but Isabel, marginal VFR, Mintesta, VFR, Tanita, marginal VFR, Portage, IFR eastern entrance, otherwise marginal, and for Chilcoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, 2,000 feet there, upper level ridge over Western Canada and Northwest Territories. That's why you see the 8,000 foot freezing level there up to the northwest on the chart. And then kind of a warmer push with that southerly winds head of the front, and the big storm coming into the Aleutians tomorrow morning, 2,000 feet there, well into the Bering Sea, 8,000 feet just north of Akanatka. And for icing long and ahead of the front, look for considerable moderate rime icing. They'll be passing over the Pribilofs during the night tonight, exiting the area early tomorrow morning, moving into the Alaska Peninsula. Increasing icing threats, Bristol Bay, southwest coastal areas, Nunivak Island. And looks like most of the heaviest icing will stay south of the Panhandle. Maybe some of that slipping into Dixon Entrance, just catching Heidelberg and maybe Metlakatla, and that's about it, icing free over the remainder of the state. Jet stream, weak upper level high over the lower Yukon Valley. Otherwise, basically southerly flow, 105 knots, one jet coming up around that ridge over Western Canada. And 75 to 105 knot west-northwest winds over the southern Bering Sea. And looking at the 9,000 foot wind flow chart, that big storm coming just near the Pribilofs, or just to the south there, 85 knot northwest jet winds behind that, and then diminishing to 55 knots farther west. Winds on the increase, 55 knots Alaska Peninsula. And pretty strong winds coming into the southern Panhandle, 3,000 foot winds showing 50 knot winds right along and off the central and south coast of the Panhandle. 65 to 80 knot winds circulating around that low center there near the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise 40 knot winds into Prince William Sound, eastern North Gulf Coast. Widespread moderate chop, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, southwest interior, all of the Aleutians, Fognak Island, the Barrens, Prince William Sound into the Copper River Basin and the southeast coast.
Some places on the surface you might have these steep cracks and giant fissures that you would have to be careful not to fall into. In other places you might see towers of ice right next to places that were relatively smooth. You might see places that were dark. Ice there takes the form of rock. It's frozen solid until you dig down into that ocean. So you may see some things that look similar to Earth, but you may see some things that are very different.
That voice you just heard?
I am Morgan Cable, NASA scientist.
I love it.
That's Morgan. She's probably one of NASA's best spokespeople for exploring our solar system's icy moons.
Europa is a fascinating place. It has this liquid water ocean that's about 3 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. That's a lot of water.
To understand what makes Earth so special, sometimes you need to back up and take in the big picture. Remember, the cryosphere is every place on Earth with frozen water. And water is one of the biggest indicators for life.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it.
And so far, Earth is the only planet we know of with life. Although Europa isn't the only icy moon in our solar system, NASA has identified it as one of those places with key astrobiological potential. Morgan is a collaborator on the Mapping Imaging Spectrometer for Europa, an instrument selected for NASA's next mission to Jupiter's icy moon Europa. But she's also more than just a scientist working in a laboratory. She's preparing future NASA missions for success on the surface of alien worlds. This year, Morgan and her colleagues were in the field studying how life colonizes in fresh lava.
Earth, it turns out, has a lot of excellent, what we call analog environments, places that are similar enough to some of these other worlds that we can conduct some tests and we can do some analyses here. Now, they're not perfect, of course. They're not going to be exactly like Europa, but we can still learn a lot by testing in these environments. Some of these places include Antarctica and the Arctic Circle, but there are other places too, Alaska, Greenland, even Iceland. Any place where you have a lot of ice, because guess what the surface of Europa is made of? A lot of ice.
Studying the cryosphere doesn't just have big implications for Earth. It also matters for the frozen worlds in our own cosmic backyard.
If we're able to find life or evidence of past life on a place like Europa, that tells us that not only can life happen in other places, but it's common enough that it happened at least twice in the same tiny solar system. That means that the universe is wide open in terms of how much life we might find, the types of life we might find. It would revolutionize how we see ourselves and the possibilities for contact in the universe. It would be amazing. Oh, it's so exciting.
As it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. So it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving. My interest in glaciers comes from the sheer size of these things and how much they're able to change on human timescales. And so the amount of mass and energy being transferred by glaciers around the globe is tremendous. It's an absolutely fascinating thing to study from space.
Mountain glaciers are some of the most charismatic parts of the cryosphere. Some might cling to the edges of cliffs at higher elevations, then lay bare and flat in a broad plain, looking cracked and weathered like elephant skin, before tumbling thousands of feet toward the sea and terminating in a dramatic calving front. They're like motion frozen in time, until they aren't. They tell a story about the distant past and yet are incredibly responsive to the present. You can understand why they'd be captivating to all of us, and especially cryospheric scientists. Meet Alex Gardner, a cryospheric scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, who is going to help break down what a classic West Coast North American glacier might look like, where high amounts of snow dump onto the mountains.
And at higher elevations, there's melt in summer, but not enough melt to get rid of all of that snow. And so that snow accumulates, it compacts, it turns into ice, and it starts to flow under its own weight, and it flows down the valleys. And as it flows down the valleys, it actually carves those valleys out and it makes them deeper. And so it creates these beautiful fjords where the ice flows down, snakes out and down to the ocean or to the lakes or further inland. And so that ice is flowing, it's moving.
Alex uses satellite data to study large-scale changes in glacial ice. But 2,000 miles to the north, Chris Larson from the University of Alaska Fairbanks spends a lot of time studying glaciers from the air. He's been flying over Alaskan mountain glaciers for many years, most recently on a NASA-funded mission called Operation Icebridge Alaska. He's absolutely enamored with his local rivers of ice.
And what do you love about mountain glaciers?
Well, they're in mountains, so they're really pretty.
You couldn't ask for a better way to experience Alaska on a large scale than to go flying around for campaign after campaign and look at all of the mountains in Alaska. Truly infinite. You just feel like you'll never see the end of them and don't want to either.
But Chris doesn't spend weeks away from home and family for the views. Chris and his colleagues at NASA want to answer some pretty big questions by learning more about Alaskan glaciers and how they tick.
You know, why does NASA care about these? Well, they actually disproportionately contribute a large amount to sea level rise.
In the long run, as the Earth warms due to climate change, the big ice sheets and mighty outlet glaciers of Greenland and Antarctica stand to contribute the most to sea level rise, simply because the vast majority of the planet's ice is stored there. But currently, it's the world's smaller mountain glaciers in comparatively warmer places like Alaska and Patagonia that are contributing about a third of all inputs to sea level rise, even though they account for only 1% of the world's ice.
mostly due to them being dynamic. They have water at the bed, which allows them to slide fast, and they react quickly to climate change and have higher velocities than their polar counterparts.
Back at JPL, AKwx uses satellite measurements of global ice and computer models to predict ultimately how much sea level rise we might see due to climate change. But in the case of mountain glaciers, we also care about the local impacts of disappearing ice.
When we think of changes in ice sheets, we typically think of just what is the consequence for sea level rise and the future evolution of the ice sheets. But glaciers in other regions, like high mountain Asia, Alaska, the European Alps, these are places where changes in runoff matters to stream flows. In places like high mountain Asia, you have a lot of glaciers that feed the streams that flow down to populated regions. And that runoff becomes significant for water resources, irrigation, and agriculture.
Both Alex and Chris are passionate about understanding how glaciers are changing and what it means for our planet's future. They'll continue to use tools like elevation maps from the ICESat-2 satellite and detailed airborne measurements to monitor changing ice.
By the end of the tunnel, you're about 100 feet underground, and you're surrounded by bones sticking out of the wall from the steppe bison and the mastodons. There's sticks that are 40,000 years old. There's grass that's still green, that's tens of thousands of years old.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Coastal water forecast for the Panhandle. Gales on the south coast, east-northeast winds 30 to 40 knots, seas just under 20 feet. Lighter winds on the north coast, variable northeast to southeast at about 20 knots, seas 8 feet. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, northerlies at 20 knots. Stevens Passage north at 15, and northeast winds at 20 knots for Clarence Strait. And the outlook for Friday. Clarence Strait, gale warning. Southeast winds increasing to 35 knots with 7-foot seas. Southeast winds increasing to 25 knots for Stevens Passage. Lynn Canal north at 20. Gale warnings along the south coast. Southeast 35 to 40 knots. And small craft advisories on the north coast. Southeast winds 30 knots. Seas 16 to 18 feet. For Prince William Sound, look for southeast winds tomorrow 20 knots with 4-foot seas. Eastern North Gulf Coast around Middleton Island, winds will be southerly at 20 knots. Lighter winds for the western North Gulf Coast, southwest at 15 there. Cook Inlet, south winds 10 to 15 knots, 2 to 3 foot seas. And Kamishak Bay, Barren Island, southeast winds 20 knots, seas running 6 feet in Kamishak Bay to 11 feet around the Barren Islands. And for the day on Thursday, increasing winds for Cook Inlet, northeast 20 to 30 knots, strongest south of the Forelands. Northeast 30 knots also for Kamishak Bay. North Gulf Coast, small craft advisories. East winds at 30 knots with 15-foot seas. Prince William Sound, northeast winds 20 knots. Barren Island, small craft advisories. East winds at 25 knots. Kodiak Island, variable to southeast winds at 20 knots. Seas 4 to 11 feet. Gale warnings from Sitkinak to Castle Cape and also for Bristol Bay. Southeast winds at 40 knots in those areas. And for the Alaska Peninsula, gale warnings, southeast winds 40 to 45 knots, gale force gusts there on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula out of the bays, or I should say storm force gusts out of the bays on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, and then even stronger winds in store for Thursday as that low center drops southeastward across the peninsula. Look for hurricane force westerlies there and from Cape Sarachev to Castle Cape. West 65 knots. Storm warnings on the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Northwest at 50. Seas around 30 feet. Gale warnings for Bristol Bay. Northeast at 35. Small craft advisories for Kodiak Island for southeast winds at 25 knots. And for the Fox Islands tomorrow, storm warnings. West-southwesterlies 50 to 55 knots. Adak and Atka, storm warnings. West winds 50 to 55 knots. Seas 25 to 30 feet. And gale warnings from Chitka Island northwest at 45, Kiska to Shimia northwest at 40. And moving on to Thursday, Hurricane force wind warnings for Unalaska Island. West winds 65 to 70 knots sustained. Seas 45 feet in the Bering Sea side of the island there and 35 feet Pacific side. Unmak Island storm warnings. West winds 55 to 60 knots. Seas as high as 40 feet. Gale warnings for Adak and Atka. Northwest 40 to 45 knots. And Amchitka Island to Shimya, winds will be lighter, 20 to 30 knots out of the northwest. Pribilofs tomorrow. Gale warnings, southeast 45 knots, northeast 45 St. Matthew Island, southwest coast easterlies 45 knots, 13 to 15 foot seas. Norton Sound, St. Lawrence Island, southeast winds at 20 knots. And for the day, Thursday, Pribilofs, Friday, northwest at 50 knots, northeast 35 knots for Kamishak Bay, south or Yukon Delta coast north at 30, north winds 30 knots for St. Matthew Island, northeast at 30 for St. Lawrence Island. Eastern Arctic coast, pretty light winds by comparison, 5 to 10 knots out of the east and northeast, east 15 on the central coast, southeast 15 on the west side, and 20 knot winds from Wales to Cape Thompson. Those will swing around to the northeast at 20 knots from Wales to Cape Thompson. Otherwise, northeast winds from Cape Thompson to Point Lay, or actually the central coast, 10 to 15 knots. And for the central and eastern Beaufort Sea coast, light winds from the northeast, barely a breeze at 5 knots with seas less than 2 feet. For tonight, pretty dry from the Arctic coast all the way down to the Alaska Range. Chance of snow showers, Norton Sound, Seward Peninsula, lingering rain or snow showers, southwest coast. And chance of light rain or showers, North Gulf Coast, at low center tracking northeastward but weakening. And rain, best chance over the northern panhandle. Big storm coming into the southern Bering Sea, tracking slowly eastward to near the Pribilofs on Thursday. And then that whole system slides off to the southeast, bringing hurricane force winds to the eastern Aleutians and western Alaska Peninsula during the afternoon hours, while a series of lows start to track north and northwestward once again off the southeast coast for strong winds and heavy rain.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.